Today on Cam's Kitchen, we're going to cook a steak. It's a porterhouse steak I've got there. Some Tassie beef, but of course, just go to your butchers or the supermarket and get whatever you prefer. So we're going to talk a bit about cooking some steak. We're going to do a Szechuan pepper steak, but of course, a lot of these techniques you can use with, like, a little bit of chili, or you could do it with just some, regular pepper, or a mix of the Szechuan and the normal pepper, which what we might do today is a bit of a mix between the two. But we'll talk a bit about steak and get your steaks nice and perfectly cooked. So first, before we start, it's great to pull your steaks out of the fridge, half an hour or so before you cook them. If they're super cold and you throw them in a hot pan, they sort of shrink and they sort of, relax out and shrink, and a lot of the sort of juices and stuff will come running out of there. So take your meat out for a little while before you cook it. So make sure it's not super cold, and we'll begin. All right, so here I've just got some regular pepper. I'll just move the camera down a little bit there. Some regular pepper, and I've got some Szechuan pepper, which is Chinese pepper. This is great pepper to do your salt and pepper squid with if you like that dish. Try it with some Szechuan pepper. It is absolutely delicious. So it's got a real fragrant, sort of lemony smell. It's a strong sort of smelling, citrusy sort of flavoured pepper. But it goes great with this dish. Great with a nice steak. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is, of course, you could put all these into a mortar or pestle or whatever, but you can just use the back of your knife, get it nice and tight, back of your hand. When you smash your things down with your knife like that, it's good to sort of like have that little gap between under the knife. So when you hit it, you get that kind of pop. You hear that little pop? You get that really nice little crushed thing. So I'll show you again. I'll just do that there. So I've got that little gap there. So hold it up a bit, and then it's all nice and crushed up. I'm sure that was noisy too. I'll just run the knife through and all together. You don't want it too fine, you still want some bits in there. There we go, pepper mix. So then what you want to do is, if you've got a nice big piece of fat on that side of that steak, which this steak definitely has, what you do, you can add a little bit of salt too. You don't want to use too much salt pre-cooking steak because it can draw the moisture out a bit, especially if it's something like an eye fillet, which doesn't have a lot of marbling fat in it. Things like scotches, they've got a lot of marbling, so you can give them a good bit of salt. People like to salt up things like rump steaks and stuff. I'd avoid that because it, once again, just draws that moisture out, and you end up with that really tough rump steak. It might taste okay because it's got lots of salt and pepper on it, but I'm sure you've had it before. The steak is sort of, quite chewy and tough. A lot of that's just because of the salt. So just be careful with the salt. This has quite a bit of marbling in it. It's top quality steak. Huge piece of fat in the side. And it's quite thick. I'm not that quite worried too. So yeah, so watch out too, salting thinner cuts of steak, like a minute steak and things. Okay, so here we go. What I do is I just like to put a nice little line of that right across the plate. So we've got the Szechuan pepper, we've got the regular pepper, and a bit of salt. And just grab your steak and just get that on that fat bit first. Get that on there, because the reason why I do that is once it's cooked and then you carve it, you're cutting it, you're getting that nice meat, and then you get that fat bit with all that sort of, crusty sort of like salt and peppery flavouring on it, which is great. So especially if you're going to do something like a Thai beef salad. I'm watching my pan there because I've got it on super hot, but it's all good. So like a Thai beef salad, and when you pre-cook the steak and then you like to sort of fan that meat out, you get that really nice crust on the fat with the salt and pepper. So that's why I like to put it across that fat bit. Also, you can get a bit on the steak too. I'll use it all up. I'll grab the knife. A little roll in there. Pick up all those bits, and then we'll take it over there and cook it up. Okay. So here we are at the stove. Pan's getting nice and hot. Starting to get a little bit of smoke from the pan, which is sort of the indicator that it's just about ready. And also, I like to put a little bit of oil just on that steak. as you can see there. Let's give it a little rub in. Do that now, and don't oil your pan. If you oil your pan, especially if you like barbecuing steaks and stuff, you'll end up with smoke right through the kitchen, and you don't need it. Now you can see and you don't need it. Now you can see that smoke starting to sort of bellow up out of the pan, and it's ready. So what you want to do is when you place your steak down, make sure you place it away from you. So start like there, and then let it flop that way, away from you. You don't want to put things in a hot pan towards you and then flick into you, especially if it's got oil. If you drop it in like that, you'll get splashed with oil. So that way, and let it flop out away from you. Okay, I better put the extractor fan before the smoke alarm goes off. And we'll just let it do its thing for a little bit. As you can see, super hot pan. It's on high. Probably doesn't even need to be that high at the moment. I just dropped it down a little bit. It's all good though. It's going to develop a nice crust, and that's what you want. So we'll let that go for a bit, and we'll check in on it in about 2 minutes time. So as you can see, I flipped the steak over. I just dropped the extractor fan down a little bit because it was super noisy, and it's smoking away. It's got a great crust on it, as we like to call it in the biz. We call it the bark rather than the crust, but you know, it's like a bark of a tree, I guess, but that's where all the flavour lies. So I've done one turn over it. Once you flip your steak once, what you're waiting for is to see kind of the pool of moisture that you start to get up on the top of the steak. It'll happen on the sort of thinnest part first. You can see it's starting to go there. So that's how you sort of know if you're going to turn a steak. You want to see that moisture go up first. You don't want to flip your steak too often, because every time you flip your steak, the cooking process starts from the bottom of the steak and works its way up. So every time you flip it over, it goes from the bottom and works its way up. You flip it over, goes from the bottom and works its way up. So the more times you do that, the more times that it'll chance for it to go tough, because it's just recooking the same areas. Right, now you can see it's getting more moisture at the top of it. So because it's got such a big fat layer, I'm actually going to sit it up. Like, I'll find a spot where I can rest the steak up. I'll use the side of the pan there. And I'm actually got it on that fat piece. So what I'm doing is I'm rendering that fat down. Super smoky pan, as I know. I put this over the top, my colander, which I just like because it stops spluttering and stuff. I put the fan back on super high, and we'll check back in it in about 2 minutes time, 2.5 minutes time. So here we are back at Kitchen Bench HQ with our steak cooked up. You can see the juice is starting to run out of it, which is all good. So you want to let the steak rest for a little while. It's really important to let steaks rest because, as you can see, juices are starting to flow out of it. I've just taken it off out of the pan. If you start cutting into it now, you'll just get like a torrent, like a waterfall. All the juices just start flowing out of it. So especially especially resting meat when you do a roast, because if you have a big roast, a big section of meat, and you've just roasted it, and it's, you know, chicken, beef, pork, all these things, you know, you pull it out of the oven. If you just cut into it after about 2 or 3 minutes, you're just going to get all that juice, all that flavour is just going to run out into the plate. And sure, you can, you know, use that for a gravy or baste it back on top, but you want that flavour to stay in the meat. If you ever cook chicken and you're just like, there's no flavour in this chicken, generally it's because you've chopped it up just too early. So let it rest. You can put a piece of foil on top of it too, and just sort of let it sit there for a while. So it's been a couple of minutes. We're just about ready to cut open this steak. A good tester with your steak is you can do like this finger test, where it's medium rare. There's so many little tricks. With that one, they're saying, like, you know, feel that little part of your hand, and as you move through the fingers, you can actually feel that tighten up. So if you're right here, it's sort of, you know, well done, and sort of medium, and medium, sort of medium rare, and then rare, and that sort of thing. But, you know, everyone's got sort of different hands. It's all kind of like a bit of a feel thing. It depends on also what how thick your steak is, what elevation you are, what time of day it is. There's so many different elements to getting that perfect steak. So you really just want to give it a bit of a touch down. That's the best way to do. As you can see, all the juice is starting to come out. It's just looking better already. But so you also want to sort of touch down, and you want that sort of nice, sort of soft springiness, you know, to get that kind of medium rare. Unless you love your steak super rare or even blue, that'll just be so soft, you know. And if you like your steak super well done or more, you want a much firmer sort of feeling. So that's how I sort of measure it in the kitchen when we're cooking like 100 steaks, and everybody wants it different. Sort of testing it like that. So wearing a glove and things too to make sure, a disposable glove, so you're not touching everyone's food. But also, just when you're at home, give it a nice little sort of pat down and see that it's nice and springy. Okay, so before we cut into that, you want to cut against the grain. If you cut with the grain, what happens is you sort of get these sort of tougher pieces. But when you cut against the grain, it actually sort of like, you've got all these grains in the meat like that. And when you cut with the grain like that, you're pretty much just getting these pieces of meat where the fibres, they just become sort of stringy and chewy. But when you cut against it, you're cutting against all those fibres, and you get a much sort of more even tender piece of meat just in the cut. So I'll show you an easy way I do anyway to find out where the grain is and what direction is it going. And the easy way I do that is, if you have a look at the meat, yep, it's going to be juices running down there. So for the squeamish, it's not blood, it's just the meat juices. But if you grab your fingers, of course, you don't do this in a restaurant, this is what you do at home. But if you just kind of pry the meat open like that and just sort of pull it open, you can actually see the grains and where they are in the meat. They're sort of like rings of a tree. So by me just sort of pulling that meat apart, I can see that the grains are actually sort of going this way. But of course it's going to be different. So you sort of pull it apart and you have a look, sort of like rings of the tree, and they kind of like open up, because when you're pulling it apart, and you want to cut across that. So for this steak, it's going to be this angle. But, other steaks is going to be in a different direction. So it's a really good thing to know. It's not super important, but it's just one of those little extra steps that gives you that perfect steak. All right, we'll cut this up. Save those juices, whatever, for later. Like I said, the grain's sort of going that way. So we'll cut into it. We'll see how it goes. Of course, I should have put the old tea towel under the chopping board beforehand. There we go. I'll grab that middle piece out. See, lovely. We've got those pieces of the grain cut against it rather than with it, and the beautiful crust on that fat, and beautifully cooked too. So there you go. So all about steak today. Remember, pull your steak out of the fridge earlier if you can. That way it's not cooking it at super cold, it's at room temperature. Super hot pan, no oil in the pan, oil the meat. Put your pepper or whatever on it beforehand. Also, when you drop it into the pan, make sure it goes down like that and then flops away from you and not towards you, especially if it's like spluttering and stuff. Or as always, keep your pan super dry. You don't want any water when you're cooking with a super hot pan in the rivets or around the pan, because it will splutter. Cook it on that fat bit, so when you're flipping it over, remember to give it some love on that piece of fat there and render that down. And turn your steaks just once, really. You don't really need to be multiple turning your steaks. Like I said, every time you turn your steak, the cooking process starts from the bottom and works its way up. So you flip it over, starts at the bottom, works its way up, starts at the bottom, works its way up. So you just end up cooking the same bits over and over again, and the middle bit doesn't get much love. So put it down, sort of flip it once, that's about it. Wait for that juices and stuff to come up. That's when you know it's ready to turn. If it's sticking to your pan, generally it's not ready to be turned. So if you're grabbing your tongs and you're about to flip it over and it's stuck to the pan, it's probably not ready to be turned yet, and that bark or crust or whatever hasn't quite developed yet. And then cut against the grain, let your meat rest, and that's pretty much everything with steaks that you really need to know. Let me know how you all go out there, any dramas. Of course, I would love to help you guys out, so just send me a message and I'll see what I can do. All right, take care. See you, bye.